The wind howled across the frozen moon, whipping up clouds of icy dust that stung Jack's hunter's face. He crouched low among the twisted wreckage of the alien freighter, his boots crunching on metal shards and frozen snow. The storm was coming faster than he expected, and every second counted. His breath formed quick clouds in the cold air as he scanned the debris with his portable scanner. That's when he heard it, a faint, desperate sound that made him freeze. It was a cry high-pitched and weak, like nothing he had ever heard before. Jax's heart raced. He carefully moved toward the source, stepping over jagged pieces of metal. The sound came from inside a collapsed cargo bay, where the walls had crumpled under the impact. There, tangled among broken pipes and smoldering wires, he saw her. A young dragon, barely the size of a human teenager, lay chained to the wreckage. Her scales shimmered dimly in the dull light, gray and dull, with streaks of silver and blue. Her wings were folded tightly, trembling with each shallow breath. Her eyes were wide, intelligent, and scared. Jax's stomach tightened. He had worked on ships, repaired engines, and navigated dangerous zones before, but nothing had prepared him for this. He crouched beside her, speaking softly. "Hey, it's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." His voice cracked slightly in the cold, but the dragon's ears twitched and she turned her gaze fully toward him. The chains were heavy, made of some alien alloy that resisted his small tools. Jax worked quickly, carefully removing the locks one by one. He didn't want to frighten her further. The dragon watched him with sharp, intelligent eyes, tilting her head as if she understood his actions. When the last chain fell away, she hesitated for a moment, then slowly moved her head toward him. Thunder rolled across the sky and the storm hit, driving him to act faster. He lifted her gently into his arms, feeling the strange warmth of her small body through his gloves. He stumbled over debris but managed to reach a small overhang in the wreckage. She let out a soft hiss, not aggressive but uncertain, and nuzzled against his chest. That was when he noticed movement on the cliffs above. Shadows flickered, silent and cautious, watching him. He froze. Hundreds of miles of ice stretched around them, and yet here, creatures were observing. Dragons. His heart skipped a beat. The stories he had heard of intelligent dragons were often dismissed as myths, but now he saw them, hidden in the snow and rocks, their eyes gleaming in the storm's dim light. They were huge, larger than he could have imagined, with scales that shimmered even in the faint light. Jax realized that the dragon in his arms must be part of a larger group. He glanced down at her and whispered, "You're not alone." She looked at him, her breathing slowing as if she understood. The others were watching, silent and still, and he sensed their curiosity, their caution. The storm made it impossible to see clearly, but their presence was undeniable. Lightning struck a ridge, illuminating the scene for a brief second. He caught a glimpse of one of the dragons fully, a magnificent creature, wings tucked neatly against its body, eyes bright with intelligence. It tilted its head and regarded him. Jax felt a strange connection, as if the dragon was assessing him, weighing whether he was a threat or a friend. He knew he couldn't stay in the open. The storm would bury them in minutes if he didn't find proper shelter. He scanned the wreckage and spotted a half-collapsed storage bay nearby. It wasn't perfect, but it would shield them from the worst of the storm. With careful movements, he carried the young dragon toward it, speaking softly all the while. "Almost there. Just a little further." She didn't resist, though her tail twitched nervously against his legs. Inside the storage bay, the wind's howl softened. He laid her down gently, brushing a bit of ice from her scales. She flinched at the touch at first, but then relaxed, curling up with her head resting on his knee. He looked around the bay. There were pieces of the freighter he could use to barricade the entrance, creating a small sanctuary for them. It wouldn't be warm, but it would be safe from the worst of the storm. As he worked, he kept glancing at the shadows outside. The larger dragons hadn't moved. He wondered if they were waiting to see what he would do next. Would he harm their young? Or was he, somehow, a protector? He didn't know, but he felt a responsibility heavier than anything he had faced before. Hours passed. The storm raged outside, but inside the storage bay, there was a fragile peace. The young dragon, exhausted from fear and injury, finally closed her eyes and slept lightly. Jax sat beside her, listening to the wind and thinking about what had just happened. He had rescued her, yes, but he had also stepped into a world far larger and more dangerous than he could have imagined. From somewhere in the cliffs, a low hum echoed, a sound that vibrated through the frozen ground. Jax tensed, his hand on a piece of metal he could use as a weapon if needed. But the hum was not aggressive. It was a message or a warning, something he could not yet understand. He realized that this world was alive with creatures far smarter than humans often believed. The dragons were not mere animals. They were sentient, aware, and capable of choice. Jax leaned back, feeling the weight of the moment. He had found a dragon, rescued her from certain death, and unknowingly stepped into the watchful eyes of her pack. The storm would pass, but what came next could change everything. He had to be careful. He had to be clever. And he had to earn their trust. For the first time in his life, Jax felt the humbling truth of how small humanity could seem, and how extraordinary it could be when courage met intelligence in unexpected forms. Outside, the shadows shifted, and the distant glint of dragon eyes watched him. The storm had not yet passed, but a new chapter had begun, one that neither human nor dragon would ever forget. Jax watched the young dragon Lyra, as she slowly stirred in the small shelter he had made. Her eyes opened, glowing faintly in the dim light, and she tilted her head, studying him with careful curiosity. She flinched slightly when he reached out but didn't move away. Jax smiled softly. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you," he said. She let out a small hiss, not loud or threatening, just a warning. He understood. It was her way of saying she was unsure. Over the next few days, Jax worked to earn Lyra's trust. He brought her small pieces of food he had salvaged from the freighter, learning which she preferred. He spoke to her in soft tones, explaining what he was doing as he repaired tools and equipment around the wreckage. At first, she stayed at a cautious distance, watching him like a shadow. But each day she edged closer, testing him, observing how he moved, and whether he would respond with care or danger. Jax noticed something extraordinary. Lyra did not act like an ordinary animal. She remembered small details like where he hid supplies or the way he moved among the wreckage. She learned quickly, adapting to his routines, sometimes anticipating his actions. And when he was careless, she warned him with a low growl or a flash of her wings. It was as if she understood the concept of teamwork. One evening, Jax sat beside her and tried something new. He held out a small piece of metal he had shaped into a tool, showing her how it worked. She watched intently, her eyes following every movement. Then, with a careful swipe of her claw, she touched it. The connection was brief but unmistakable. They were learning from each other. Jax realized that this was more than simple trust. They were forming a bond, a partnership between human and dragon. Lyra began to communicate in ways he could understand. She made soft hums, almost musical, and small gestures with her head and wings. Jax paid close attention, learning the meanings through patterns and repetition. He discovered that she could sense vibrations in the ice, detect distant movements, and even feel changes in the air that he could not perceive. It amazed him. This young dragon, fragile as she seemed, possessed abilities that outmatched his technology in certain ways. At night, Jax would watch the sky while Lyra slept. He wondered about her pack, hidden somewhere in the icy cliffs above. He had seen them briefly, but he didn't know how close they were. The bond with Lyra was fragile. If he made a mistake, it could break instantly. Yet he felt that the dragons were watching him, not with hostility but with careful judgment. He had become part of something much larger than himself. One day, as he explored a nearby ridge for supplies, Lyra followed him without hesitation. She moved gracefully across the ice, wings tucked close, eyes alert. Jax realized that she trusted him enough to leave the safety of their shelter. They discovered a small spring hidden beneath the ice, providing fresh water. Lyra approached it first, dipping her snout carefully, then stepping aside for Jax to drink. It was a simple act, but it spoke volumes. She was sharing, allowing him to be part of her world. As the days passed, the storm that had battered the moon subsided, revealing the jagged beauty of the frozen landscape. Jax and Lyra explored more, learning from each other. He showed her how to use simple tools, and she taught him to sense the subtle vibrations in the ice, warning of weak spots or hidden crevasses. They became a team, moving in sync, anticipating each other's actions. The bond was no longer fragile. It was growing stronger with each shared experience. Then one night, a low rumble echoed from the cliffs above. Jax froze. Lyra's ears twitched and she stepped in front of him, wings spread slightly in a protective stance. The rumble grew louder and shapes moved in the darkness. The pack had come closer. Hundreds of eyes glinted in the moonlight, intelligent and watchful. Jax held his ground, staying calm. Lyra hissed softly, a warning to the others. To his surprise, the dragons did not attack. Instead, they observed. Jax understood that they were assessing him, trying to decide if he was a threat to their young. He spoke softly, holding out his hands to show he carried no weapons. Lyra stepped forward, nuzzling his hand lightly. The gesture seemed to reassure the pack. Slowly, one of the larger dragons approached, wings folded, eyes studying him. Then another joined, and another, until several were surrounding him and Lyra in a careful circle. Jax realized the importance of this moment. He had not just saved Lyra, he had earned the tentative trust of her entire pack. The dragons were creatures of intelligence and instinct, capable of judgment beyond human comprehension. They were choosing to see him as an ally, not a threat. He felt a mixture of awe and humility. Humans were clever, but here was a species that matched them in wisdom, intuition, and strategy. Over the next few days he continued to build this fragile alliance. The pack began to reveal themselves gradually, showing their unique abilities and learning to accept his presence. Lyra became a bridge between them, demonstrating that trust could be given and received. Jax learned to read the subtle cues of the dragons, the flick of an ear, the curl of a tail, the hums that vibrated through the ground. Communication became a dance of patience, observation, and respect. By the end of the week, the bond between human and dragon was undeniable. Lyra would perch close to him as he worked, sometimes resting her head against his shoulder, letting him know she felt safe. The pack watched from a distance, occasionally stepping closer, testing boundaries but never aggressive. Jax felt a new sense of purpose. He was no longer just a technician fixing a freighter. He was part of a living, thinking world that demanded respect and offered friendship in return. And so, under the pale light of the moon reflecting off the ice, Jax understood something profound. Courage and compassion were not the only tools a human could offer. Understanding, patience, and trust could build connections that no technology could replicate. With Lyra by his side and the pack watching, he felt ready for whatever challenges awaited. Together, human and dragon had begun a partnership that could change everything, not just for themselves but for the galaxy beyond this frozen moon. Jax had grown used to the quiet companionship of Lyra and the cautious presence of her pack. Each day he repaired pieces of the freighter wreckage, gathering scrap to make tools and shelter, while Lyra flitted around, watching and sometimes helping in her own way. Her sharp eyes noticed things he missed: cracks in the ice, loose panels, and the faint vibrations of distant movements. He had begun to rely on her senses as much as his own. One morning, as the pale sun rose over the icy cliffs, Lyra stiffened suddenly. Her tail twitched and her ears pricked. She let out a low, warning hum that vibrated through the frozen ground. Jax froze, following her gaze. Far across the plain, shapes moved slowly, deliberately, scanning the wreckage. Alien figures, he had seen their kind before, poachers. They were searching for dragons, capturing them to sell on distant worlds. Jax's stomach tightened. He had known this day might come, but seeing the threat so close made his chest pound. Lyra hissed softly, circling him, then taking a position in front of the shelter. She spread her small wings slightly, making herself appear larger. Jax understood her instinct immediately. She was protecting him, but also preparing for a fight if necessary. He took a deep breath, knowing he had to act carefully. If he rushed or panicked, it could provoke the poachers, or worse, anger the dragons. He glanced toward the cliffs, where the pack had been watching quietly. Now, some of the larger dragons had begun to emerge, their scales glinting in the sunlight. They moved silently, almost like shadows shifting over the ice. Jax realized they were not here to attack the humans but to defend their young. He marveled at their coordination. Every movement seemed planned, precise, and deliberate. The poachers advanced, weapons scanning the terrain, unaware of the dragons watching from above. Jax knew he couldn't stop them with force alone. His hands shook slightly as he gathered scrap and tools, thinking quickly. Using mirrors, he reflected sunlight toward the approaching figures, creating flashes that distracted them. Lyra hissed and leapt, knocking over a pile of debris that sent a loud clang echoing across the plain. The poachers flinched, their attention divided. From the cliffs, a larger dragon swooped down, its wings stirring the cold wind into a sudden gust. It landed just behind the poachers, its eyes fixed and unblinking. Jax felt the raw power of the creature, and he realized the dragons were not just observers, they were strategists. Each movement was calculated, designed to protect their young and intimidate the intruders. The poachers regrouped, scanning the cliffs and spotting the shadows of the dragons. Fear flickered in their eyes. They raised weapons, but the dragons were too fast and too smart. A smaller dragon, perhaps Lyra's sibling, darted in and tugged at the legs of one poacher, knocking him off balance. Another dragon leapt onto a pile of ice, shaking loose a cascade of frozen shards that forced the intruders to scatter. Jax watched in awe. This was not random attack, it was coordinated defense, and he could feel the intelligence behind it. He moved closer to Lyra, whispering, "We can do this. Just stay calm." She pressed against his side and he felt a surge of courage. Together they had to guide the dragons, showing them the humans were allies, not threats. Jax raised his arms, signaling the poachers to retreat. Surprisingly, the larger dragon above him tilted its head, understanding the gesture, and let out a deep, resonating hum. The sound traveled across the ice, vibrating under Jax's feet, and the poachers hesitated. Realizing their advantage was slipping, the poachers fired a few shots into the air. Lyra darted forward, her wings flaring, and one of the larger dragons swooped low, creating a barrier between the humans and the weapons. Jax ducked, using a piece of scrap to shield himself, while watching the poachers falter. It was clear that their strategy relied on fear, but they had underestimated the intelligence and coordination of the dragons, and the human who had earned their trust. Hours passed in a tense standoff. Jax worked silently, improvising traps with tools and pieces of wreckage. Lyra assisted in small ways, nudging debris into position or signaling the larger dragons with hums and gestures. Together they turned the landscape into a maze, confusing the poachers and forcing them to retreat step by step. The dragons did not attack with violence. They used their knowledge of the terrain, their speed, and their senses to outsmart the humans. Finally, the poachers, exhausted and disoriented, decided the risk was too high. They retreated, leaving behind equipment and vehicles. Jax let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, and Lyra nuzzled his hand. The larger dragons above lowered their wings slightly, their watchful eyes still on him, but their judgment passed. He had proven himself worthy of their trust, and together, they had faced the danger without bloodshed. Jax spent the next hours reinforcing the shelter and checking on Lyra. She was tired, but her eyes glowed with quiet satisfaction. He knew the pack was observing, silently approving. For the first time he felt like more than just a human technician. He was part of something larger, a team where courage, intelligence, and trust mattered more than weapons or technology. That night, as the cold winds blew across the ice, Jax and Lyra sat together on the edge of the shelter. The pack rested in the cliffs above, their presence a silent reassurance. Jax realized that survival was not just about strength, it was about understanding, patience, and partnership. He had faced real danger and together they had overcome it. The bond with Lyra had grown stronger and now it extended to her pack. The moonlight reflected off the ice, casting long shadows of dragons and human together. Jax felt a strange calm. The threat had passed, but he knew it would return someday. Poachers were persistent, and other dangers existed in the galaxy. But for now he had won their respect and they had learned to trust him. Humanity in this moment had proven it could adapt, survive, and protect in ways that even the most intelligent predators could recognize. As he drifted into a light sleep beside Lyra, Jax thought about the future. Together they would face whatever came next, poachers, storms, or even unknown threats across the stars. And he knew, deep in his heart, that trust and courage could be as powerful as any weapon. The bond he had formed with Lyra and her pack was more than survival. It was the beginning of something extraordinary, something that could change the way humans and dragons saw each other forever. The wind was sharp and cold as Jax Hunter and Lyra moved across the frozen plain. The pack had begun to follow more closely now, larger dragons emerging from their hiding places, their scales glinting in the pale sunlight. Jax had learned to read their signals. The flick of a tail, the tilt of a head, the hums that vibrated through the ice. Each sign meant something and each step required careful thought. Today the threat they had feared was returning. From a distant ridge, Jax saw the poachers again. This time they came with more equipment and a faster ship, determined to capture the dragons. The humans were armed and confident, but they had not counted on intelligence as sharp as a blade in the cold. Jax whispered to Lyra, "We need a plan. They won't leave easily." Lyra responded with a low hum, circling him, signaling that the pack was ready to act. The dragons moved like shadows across the ice, silent and coordinated. Jax felt a thrill of awe as he watched their strategy unfold. The poachers advanced, unaware of the traps and barriers that had been silently set in motion. Lyra darted ahead, knocking small rocks and ice shards to create distractions, while the larger dragons flanked the intruders from above. Jax directed the human tools he could manage, reflective mirrors to blind sensors, improvised tripwires, and frozen debris to block paths. As the poachers drew closer, one of the larger dragons swooped low, wings spreading wide to create a barrier. The humans froze, realizing that the dragons were not just defending, they were controlling the battlefield. Lyra took a daring move, darting between the poacher's legs and nipping at equipment, causing a chain reaction of confusion. The poachers stumbled, weapons misfiring, their confidence faltering. Jax realized the dragons were thinking several steps ahead. Each dragon's movement complemented the others, coordinating silently as if they shared one mind. He had never seen teamwork like this. Lyra nudged him toward a ridge, signaling that he should climb to get a better vantage point. From there, he could guide some of the human defenses, signaling with hand movements and small gestures. It was a strange partnership, human ingenuity and dragon instinct working together flawlessly. The poachers tried to regroup, but the dragons anticipated every move. A large dragon landed behind them, shaking a pile of ice and metal, forcing the humans to scatter. Another dragon circled overhead, dropping frozen shards that jammed machinery and blocked paths. Lyra darted among the poachers, signaling to her pack with hums that vibrated through the ice, coordinating the next wave of maneuvers. Jax was amazed. The dragons were not violent without reason. They used strategy and intelligence to neutralize the threat without bloodshed. He realized that the poachers had underestimated the creatures' minds as much as their loyalty. Humans often prided themselves on cleverness, but here was a species that rivaled them in calculation, intuition, and timing. And now he was part of it, guiding from within. The poachers panicked. Their leader shouted orders, but the confusion made them ineffective. They were forced into a narrow pass between ice cliffs, where Jax had prepared a final set of barriers with Lyra's guidance. The dragons swooped in carefully, not to harm, but to isolate and block escape routes. One by one, the poachers' vehicles were disabled, their weapons disarmed by clever tactics. Every move was calculated, precise, and entirely non-lethal. Jax felt a surge of respect for the dragons. This was more than loyalty, it was intelligence, compassion, and strategy combined. Lyra flew past him, signaling that it was almost over. The poachers, exhausted and trapped, had no choice but to retreat. They abandoned their equipment and fled across the ice, shouting in frustration and disbelief. Jax exhaled slowly, relief washing over him. The dragons did not immediately celebrate. They watched the retreat, ensuring the humans left completely. Then slowly they returned to the cliffs, their eyes still on Jax and Lyra. He approached Lyra, crouching beside her. She leaned into him, brushing her head against his chest, a quiet sign of trust and approval. Jax realized that they now saw him as one of their own, a part of their world, not just a helper. Over the next hours, Jax worked to repair minor damage to the freighter with Lyra and the pack observing. He had been tested and he had passed. The dragons allowed him to move freely among them, an unprecedented act of acceptance. Jax marveled at the depth of their intelligence, their understanding of tactics, of cooperation, and of protecting their own without needless violence. Humanity had earned respect here, not through strength but through courage, patience, and cleverness. That night, the pack gathered near the shelter, their presence both reassuring and humbling. Jax and Lyra sat among them, listening to the low hums that vibrated through the ground. He realized that the dragons had chosen him as part of their extended family. Trust had been given, not blindly but deliberately. It was a bond that could not be broken lightly. Jax thought about the galaxy beyond the frozen moon. Poachers and hunters were everywhere, but if humans could forge alliances like this, they could protect life in ways others could not. He felt a new purpose, a vision of a future where humans and dragons worked together to defend what was precious. Lyra nuzzled his hand and he smiled. Together they had not just survived, they had shown that intelligence and trust could overcome greed and violence. As the stars appeared in the cold sky, reflecting off the icy plains, Jax felt the weight of what had happened. He had been a simple technician, skilled with tools and machines, but now he was part of a living, thinking community that stretched beyond his understanding. The unthinkable had happened. A human had earned the trust and cooperation of an entire dragon pack. And together, they had defeated a threat that no one could have overcome alone. For the first time, Jax felt something he had never felt before, that humanity could be more than explorers or engineers. They could be protectors, allies, and partners to creatures as intelligent and powerful as dragons. And as Lyra curled against him, safe and alert, he knew that this bond, human and dragon, trust and strategy, would shape not only their survival but the future of the galaxy itself. The frozen moon was quiet now. The storm had passed, leaving the icy landscape sparkling under the twin suns. Jax Hunter stood at the edge of the shelter, looking out at the dragons scattered across the cliffs. Lyra perched nearby, wings folded, watching him with those bright, intelligent eyes that had become familiar over the past days. The pack had grown closer to him, no longer just observers but allies. He felt a sense of wonder and responsibility settle in his chest. The poachers were gone, their threats neutralized, but Jack's new danger still lurked in the galaxy. Other hunters could come, and worse, unknown species might threaten the dragon's survival. Yet he also knew something extraordinary had happened. Humanity had earned the trust of a species that no one believed could be reasoned with. And that bond was more powerful than any weapon or ship. Lyra nuzzled his hand, reminding him that they were partners now. He smiled. "We've done well," he whispered. "But this is just the beginning." Together they would need to travel, find safe zones, and ensure her species had a chance to thrive again. The pack had gathered on the cliffs, their eyes bright, some stepping closer to inspect him, others curling in the snow, relaxed but alert. Jax realized they were beginning to accept him not just as a friend, but as part of their family. He spent the next few days repairing the freighter as best he could. Lyra and a few of the dragons helped in small ways, nudging pieces into place or retrieving tools. The work was slow, but with their assistance, it became a shared effort. Jax marveled at how coordinated the dragons were, following his instructions with gestures and hums. Together they formed a team where human ingenuity met dragon instinct, each complementing the other perfectly. During a rare calm evening, Jax took Lyra aside. "You've changed my life," he said quietly. "I thought I was just fixing a ship, but I didn't know I'd find friends like you." Lyra tilted her head, her wings flicking lightly. She responded with a soft hum that vibrated through the ice, a sound he had come to understand as approval and affection. It was more than friendship. It was trust, the kind that could survive storms, danger, and uncertainty. The dragons began to explore the surroundings, showing Jax secret paths and hidden springs in the ice. He realized they had been aware of these places all along, but now they were sharing knowledge freely. Together they discovered food caches, safe resting areas, and even hidden caves where the poachers could not find them. Jax felt a deep admiration for their intelligence and care for each other. The dragons were not just powerful, they were wise and compassionate. Word of Jax's deeds began to spread, carried by transmissions from nearby colonies and passing traders. Humans and aliens alike were astonished that a single human had gained the trust of an entire dragon pack and helped them survive a major threat. Jax knew that this story would inspire others to think differently about humans, dragons, and the possibilities of cooperation between species. It was a small step, but one that could change the galaxy. One morning the pack gathered near the repaired freighter. Jax climbed aboard, checking the engines while Lyra watched from a nearby rock. The dragons flitted around, some brushing against the ship, others circling above. Jax realized they were ready to travel with him, to leave this frozen moon for a safer home. He felt a thrill of anticipation. The future was uncertain, but they would face it together. As they lifted off, the wind whipping past, Jax looked down at the icy landscape shrinking beneath them. Lyra perched on the wing, her scales glinting in the sunlight, and the rest of the pack followed in coordinated flight. He realized that humanity's ingenuity had been essential, but it was the bond, the trust, the understanding, and the courage that had made this possible. They had survived not because of strength alone, but because they had chosen to work together. The freighter moved through the stars, carrying Jax, Lyra, and the dragons toward safe zones where other endangered species awaited protection. Jax shared what he had learned about engineering and survival, while the dragons shared their knowledge of sensing danger, navigating harsh terrain, and reading the world in ways humans never could. They became teachers to each other, each species learning from the other, forming a new alliance that no one could have predicted. In the quiet moments of flight, Jax looked around at his companions and felt hope. He thought of the poachers, of dangers still out there, and of the galaxy that often overlooked the courage and intelligence of humans. But he also knew that humans could rise to meet challenges in ways no one expected. Courage, ingenuity, and empathy could achieve what force alone could not. And now, with dragons by his side, humanity had a chance to prove it on a galactic scale. Lyra leaned against him, her hum resonating through the ship. Jax stroked her scales, feeling a warmth and trust that went beyond words. The pack circled the freighter in a protective formation, and Jax understood that this was more than survival, it was a partnership. Humans and dragons together could face threats, explore new worlds, and protect life in ways that neither could do alone. As the stars stretched endlessly around them, Jax felt a sense of purpose he had never known. This was the new chapter he had been seeking, the beginning of a story that would echo across the galaxy. He was not just a technician or a rescuer, he was a bridge between species, a symbol of what humanity could achieve when it acted with courage, empathy, and wisdom. The pack followed him to new worlds, their trust unwavering. Lyra flew beside him, guiding him when he needed it and learning from him in return. Jax knew that together they could face anything. Humanity had found allies in the most unexpected form, and dragons had found a friend in a human who dared to see beyond fear. And as the freighter sailed through the stars, carrying humans and dragons alike, Jax understood the truth of what they had accomplished. When trust and courage meet, the impossible becomes possible. The galaxy would remember this alliance, and the story of a human who rescued one dragon, and gained an entire pack's loyalty, would inspire hope for generations to come. This was no longer just survival. This was the start of something greater. A new family had been formed, and a new future had begun. Together, human and dragon would face the stars, ready for whatever came next.